The bakery sat on the corner of a quiet street, the kind of place people visited every morning without thinking much about it. The glass windows were slightly fogged from the warmth inside, and the smell of fresh bread floated out onto the sidewalk. Inside, soft music played low, almost hidden beneath the sound of trays sliding, coffee cups clinking, and people chatting in calm voices. It was early, but the bakery was already busy. A young black girl pushed the door open and stepped inside. A small bell rang above her head. She paused for a second, letting the warmth settle around her. Outside, the air had been cold and sharp, but in here it felt safe and familiar. She adjusted the strap of her backpack on her shoulder and looked at the display case filled with pastries. Her eyes moved slowly, taking it all in. She was dressed simply. A clean jacket, jeans, and sneakers that showed signs of use but were well cared for. Her hair was neat, pulled back in a way that suggested she took pride in herself. There was nothing flashy about her, but nothing careless either. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from being raised to respect herself. She stepped forward and joined the short line near the counter. Ahead of her, people ordered coffee and chatted with the staff like old friends. It was clear this place was part of their daily routine. She waited patiently, hands folded in front of her, eyes occasionally drifting back to the pastries. At a table near the window sat a group of teenagers. They were loud compared to everyone else. Their chairs were pulled back casually, legs stretched out, voices full of energy that didn't quite fit the calm space. Empty plates and cups sat scattered across their table, showing they had been there for a while. At first, they barely noticed her. They were busy laughing at something on a phone, nudging each other and speaking too loudly. But as she moved closer to the counter, one of them glanced up. His eyes followed her for a moment longer than needed. He leaned back in his chair and whispered something to the others. The group slowly turned their attention toward her. Their laughter changed. It became sharper, less playful. She felt it before she fully understood it. That strange feeling when you know eyes are on you, weighing you, judging you. Her shoulders tensed slightly, but she didn't turn around. She focused on the menu board behind the counter. Coffee names, prices, small chalk drawings. She read them slowly, pretending nothing else existed. Her heart beat a little faster, but her face stayed calm. One of the teenagers let out a short laugh, louder than the rest of the room. Another followed. Their voices weren't shouting, but they weren't quiet either. They were just loud enough to be heard. People nearby noticed. A woman holding a coffee cup glanced over, then looked away. A man reading a newspaper shifted in his chair but didn't lift his eyes. The staff behind the counter exchanged quick looks but continued working. The girl felt the shift in the air. The bakery no longer felt as warm. Still, she stayed where she was. She had come here for a simple reason, and she wasn't going to leave without finishing it. She thought about her morning, about how she had left home early, how her guardian had reminded her to be kind and strong. Those words echoed quietly in her mind now. She took a slow breath. The line moved forward. She stepped closer to the counter. The glass case reflected her face back at her. She checked her expression without meaning to. Calm, steady. Behind her, the laughter continued. One of the teenagers made a comment that caused the others to snicker. The words themselves were meant to sting, but what hurt more was the tone. Casual, careless, as if her feelings didn't matter. She clenched her fingers together for a moment, then relaxed them. She had learned long ago that reacting quickly often gave people what they wanted. Tension, power. The bakery door opened again, letting in another wave of cold air. More customers came in, shaking snow or dust from their shoes. The bell rang softly. Life went on, even as something uncomfortable was happening in the corner of the room. The girl reached the counter at last. The person behind it smiled politely and asked what she would like. The simple kindness in that moment mattered more than anyone realized. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. She ordered a small loaf of bread and a pastry. Nothing fancy, just what she needed. As she spoke, the noise behind her seemed to pause, as if the group was listening closely, waiting for something. She paid and stepped aside to wait. The space near the counter was narrow. She stood with her back straight, eyes down, pretending to check her phone even though the screen stayed dark. The teenagers leaned closer together. Their words grew bolder now that they felt unseen and unchecked. The girl felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her breathing slow. She reminded herself that she was not alone, even if it felt that way. Across the room, a few customers noticed her posture, the way she stood firm without responding. Some felt uneasy, others felt guilt, but no one spoke. The smell of fresh bread filled the air again as a tray came out of the oven. For a moment, the bakery felt normal, peaceful, almost kind. Her order was called. She stepped forward, accepted the bag with both hands, and said thank you. Her voice didn't shake. As she turned toward the door, she caught her reflection in the glass again. She looked strong, not loud, not angry, just strong. She took one step toward the exit, unaware that this ordinary morning, this small bakery, and this quiet moment were about to change in a way none of them could imagine. The girl stepped aside near the wall, holding the small paper bag close to her chest. The warmth of the bread pressed lightly against her fingers, but it did little to calm the feeling inside her. She could sense the eyes behind her, feel the weight of attention that refused to fade. The bakery was still full, still busy, yet she felt strangely alone in the middle of it all. The teenagers shifted in their seats. One of them leaned back, tipping his chair onto two legs, pretending not to stare while doing exactly that. Another nudged him and laughed under his breath. Their voices stayed low, but not low enough. They wanted to be heard without being called out. She took a slow step toward the door, then paused. Something told her not to rush, not to run. She stood still, steadying herself. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her jaw tightened slightly. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. Behind her, a comment drifted through the air. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It landed softly but sharply, like something meant to cut without drawing blood. A few quiet laughs followed. She felt it in her chest first. A dull ache, familiar but never welcome. She had heard words like that before in other places. The school, on the street, sometimes even from people who smiled while saying them. She had learned early that silence could be both a shield and a burden. She kept her eyes forward. The door was only a few steps away. She could leave. She could pretend none of it mattered. But something inside her resisted that idea. Leaving too quickly would feel like agreement, like surrender. The bakery staff stayed behind the counter. One of them glanced toward the group, then toward the girl. Their hands slowed, uncertainty written across their faces. They weren't cruel people. They were just afraid of making things worse. A woman standing near the window shifted her weight and cleared her throat, as if she might speak. She didn't. She picked up her coffee instead and stared outside. The street beyond the glass looked calm and ordinary. The teenagers grew more confident. One of them whispered something and they all laughed again. Louder this time. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as they leaned closer together. They were feeding off each other's energy, enjoying the attention they believed they had earned. The girl tightened her grip on the bag, then loosened it again. She took another breath, slow and deep. She remembered the lessons she had been taught, that her worth did not depend on the opinions of strangers, that dignity was not something others could take unless she let them. She turned slightly, just enough to face the counter again. Not to confront them, but to remind herself where she was. Public place. A safe place. At least it was supposed to be. Another remark floated toward her. This one was followed by a mocking laugh that echoed just a bit too long. A few heads turned. The tension in the room thickened, like air before a storm. Her heart beat faster now, but her face stayed calm. She refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Inside, though, emotions tangled together. Anger, sadness, disappointment, not just at them but at the silence around her. She wondered if anyone would step in. If anyone would say that enough was enough. She didn't need someone to fight for her, just to acknowledge that what was happening wasn't okay. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt longer than they were. The smell of bread, once comforting, now felt heavy. Even the music seemed quieter, as if it too was holding its breath. One of the teenagers leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. He spoke again, this time with a smirk that carried more confidence than before. The words were meant to embarrass her, to reduce her to something small. She swallowed and shifted her weight. For a moment she considered speaking. Just one sentence. Just enough to defend herself. But she knew how quickly that could turn into something louder, something uglier. She chose restraint instead. Her eyes caught the reflection of the group in the glass case. They looked young, careless, unaware of how their actions might follow them beyond this moment. She wondered if they had ever been taught empathy, or if they had learned instead that cruelty was entertaining. The door opened again. Another customer stepped inside, brushing snow from their coat. The bell rang softly. No one looked up for long. The girl felt a familiar mix of strength and exhaustion. Being strong all the time took effort. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, constant, and often unseen. She took one step toward the door again. This time she didn't stop. Her hand reached for the handle, fingers wrapping around the cool metal. Behind her, the laughter flared once more, sharp and careless. It followed her like an unwanted shadow. She paused with her hand on the door, just for a second. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to leave on her own terms. She straightened her back and lifted her chin. As she pushed the door open, cold air rushed in, brushing against her face. The contrast was sudden and clear. Outside felt honest, clean. She stepped halfway through the doorway when something unexpected happened. A presence entered the bakery behind her, calm and steady. The door hadn't closed yet. She felt it without seeing it. She moved aside to let the person pass, eyes lowered out of habit. As she did, she noticed the quiet confidence in the way he walked. No rush, no hesitation, just purpose. The bell rang again as the door closed behind them both. The bakery felt different now, though no one could quite say why. She stood just inside the entrance, the bag still warm in her hands, unaware that the moment she had just endured was about to take on a meaning far bigger than she imagined. The girl stood near the entrance, the door now closed behind her. The cold air was gone, replaced again by the warmth of the bakery, but something inside her still felt unsettled. She could hear her own breathing, steady but deeper than before. The bag in her hands was crinkled slightly where her fingers pressed into it. The man who had entered just moments earlier moved past her without a word. He didn't rush. His steps were even and measured, as if he had all the time in the world. He wore simple clothes, nothing that stood out. A plain jacket, worn shoes, and a posture that felt solid, grounded. He nodded politely at her as he passed, a small gesture that carried quiet respect. She returned the nod without thinking. It felt natural, like acknowledging someone familiar even though she had never seen him before. Something about his presence made her feel less alone. He walked toward the counter and took in the room with a calm glance. Not staring, not judging, just noticing. His eyes moved from the staff to the customers, then briefly toward the group at the table. He said nothing, but he saw enough. The teenagers noticed him too, though they didn't know why. Their laughter softened for a moment, then picked back up again, forced and slightly uneven. One of them leaned closer to another and whispered, their voices lower now. The girl shifted her weight and stepped a little farther from the door. She hadn't planned to stay, but something held her there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the feeling that leaving right now would cut the moment short in a way that felt unfinished. She leaned lightly against the wall, careful not to block the entrance. From there, she could see almost everything. The counter, the tables, the reflection of the room in the glass case. She became an observer, quiet and still. The man ordered a coffee. His voice was calm, steady, and respectful. He thanked the person behind the counter and stepped aside to wait. He stood not far from the teenager's table, though he kept a polite distance. The staff seemed to relax slightly. The tension that had filled the air earlier eased just a bit, though it didn't disappear completely. The music seemed to return to its normal volume. The rhythm of the bakery tried to reset itself. The teenagers, however, were restless. One of them tapped his fingers against the table. Another rolled his eyes and leaned back again. They glanced at the man, then at the girl, then back at each other. Their confidence wavered, but they weren't ready to let go of it. A comment slipped out, quieter than before but still pointed. It wasn't loud enough to turn heads this time, but it was meant to reach her. She heard it. She always did. Her chest tightened, but she stayed where she was. She focused on the man's calm presence instead. On the way he stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, eyes forward, completely unbothered. She wondered who he was. Not his name, but his story. People like him carried stories in their posture. Years of experience. Lessons learned the hard way. The teenagers laughed again, though the sound was thinner now. One of them glanced around the room, checking for reactions. Fewer people were looking away this time. A few eyes lingered longer than before. The girl noticed this shift. It was subtle, but it mattered. Silence was starting to crack. The man's coffee was ready. He picked it up and thanked the staff again. Instead of leaving, he turned and looked around the room as if deciding where to sit. His gaze passed over the tables and paused briefly near the girl. She didn't know why, but she felt her shoulders relax. Just a little. He chose a table not far from the group, close enough to hear but far enough to keep distance. He set his cup down and sat with a straight back, hands resting calmly on the table. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't rush. He simply sat. The teenagers fell quiet for a moment. One of them frowned, clearly annoyed by the change in energy. Another whispered something, and they snickered, trying to reclaim their mood. The girl's mind drifted. She thought about how moments like this often ended. How people usually went their separate ways, carrying invisible bruises with them. She wondered if today would be any different. She adjusted the strap of her backpack again and glanced toward the door. Leaving was still an option, but so was staying. Another remark came from the table, softer but still sharp. It landed in the space between them, heavy and unwanted. The man lifted his eyes from his coffee. Just for a second. He didn't turn his head fully. He didn't react outwardly. But something in that brief glance felt deliberate. The teenagers noticed. One of them stopped mid-laugh. Another shifted in his chair. The confidence they had built began to thin, like ice cracking beneath too much weight. The bakery felt quieter again. Even the clinking of cups seemed distant. The girl watched closely now. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from anticipation. She didn't know what she expected, only that something was changing. The man took a slow sip of his coffee and set the cup down carefully. He folded his hands and looked toward the group, his expression calm and unreadable. He didn't speak yet. The teenagers avoided his eyes at first, pretending to focus on their phones or cups. One of them laughed nervously, trying to break the silence. The girl took a deep breath. She felt seen in a way she hadn't before. Not pitied, not rescued, just seen. The moment stretched, quiet and heavy, like a held breath. Outside, a car passed by, tires hissing against the street. Life continued beyond the bakery walls. Inside, the air felt charged with possibility. The girl didn't know it yet, but the calm sitting at that small table carried a strength far greater than the noise that had tried to drown her out. And soon, that strength would make itself known in a way no one in the room could ignore. The quiet in the bakery did not break right away. It settled deeper, spreading from table to table like a slow wave. People could feel it, even if they did not fully understand why. The girl remained near the wall, still holding her bag, still standing tall. Her eyes moved gently around the room, taking in every detail as if she were trying to remember this moment. The man at the table sat calmly, his coffee untouched for a while now. He watched the room without staring at anyone directly. His presence was steady, almost grounding, like an anchor dropped in restless water. The teenagers shifted again, their energy no longer playful. One of them checked his phone and pretended to laugh, but the sound came out weak. The girl felt her heartbeat slow. Not because the situation had ended, but because she no longer felt invisible. That alone changed something inside her. She had not spoken a word, yet she felt supported in a way she rarely did in moments like this. The staff behind the counter moved carefully, glancing between the tables and the door. They sensed the change too. One of them wiped the counter slowly, watching without meaning to. Another adjusted a tray of bread, hands slightly tense. One of the teenagers leaned forward and whispered something to the others. They nodded, then laughed again, trying to bring back their earlier confidence. But it didn't stick. The laughter faded too quickly. The girl took a small step away from the wall, standing more openly now. She wasn't challenging anyone. She was simply refusing to shrink. Her posture said more than words ever could. The man noticed this. His eyes followed her movement briefly, and something like quiet approval passed across his face. He didn't smile, but there was warmth there. A soft voice broke the silence near the counter as another customer placed an order. The normal sounds of the bakery tried to return. Cups moved. A register opened and closed. Still, the room felt focused, as if waiting for something unseen. One of the teenagers spoke again, louder this time, but the confidence in his voice was forced. The words drifted across the room, landing where they were meant to. A few people looked directly at him now. That had not happened before. The girl felt a flicker of anger rise, but it passed quickly. She reminded herself that she did not need to defend her worth. It already existed, untouched. The man set his cup down gently. The sound was soft, but it carried. He looked toward the group fully now, his gaze calm but firm. There was no threat in his eyes, only certainty. The teenagers noticed immediately. One of them straightened in his chair. Another stopped smiling altogether. They were no longer sure who held control of the room. The man spoke, his voice low but clear. He did not raise it. He did not shame them. He simply asked if there was a problem that needed attention. The question hung in the air. No one answered right away. The teenagers looked at each other, then back at him. One shrugged, trying to act casual, but his hands fidgeted under the table. The girl watched closely, her breath shallow but steady. She felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not fear, not anger, hope. The man continued speaking calmly, reminding them that public spaces belong to everyone, and that respect was not optional. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He spoke as someone who had given orders before, someone used to being heard. The room listened. The teenagers grew quiet. One of them muttered an apology that barely rose above a whisper. Another stared down at the table, cheeks flushed. The man nodded once, acknowledging the moment without pressing further. He did not humiliate them. He did not lecture. He simply allowed the silence to teach the lesson. The girl felt her shoulders relax fully for the first time. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The room felt lighter. The man turned toward her then. His expression softened. He asked gently if she was okay. She hesitated, then nodded. Her voice came out quiet but steady as she said she was fine. The words were true, but they also carried more meaning now. He stood slowly, giving her space. He thanked her for her strength, for handling the moment with grace. His words were not loud, but everyone heard them. A ripple of realization moved through the bakery. People who had stayed silent before now looked at her differently, with respect, with admiration. The teenagers avoided eye contact. Their earlier confidence had vanished. The man reached out and offered her a brief, respectful hug. It was gentle, protective, and sincere, not pity, pride. She accepted it without hesitation. In that moment, she felt seen in a way that went beyond this room. Someone whispered his title, recognizing him at last. A 4-star general, retired but unmistakable in bearing. The words traveled quietly but quickly. The bakery felt changed by that knowledge. The man smiled slightly, brushing off the attention. He told the girl she carried herself with honor, and that the world needed more of that. Her eyes filled, but she held her composure. She thanked him, her voice firm. The moment did not feel dramatic. Felt real, earned. As the man returned to his seat, the bakery slowly returned to its rhythm. But something lasting had been planted. The girl walked toward the door again, her steps lighter now. She knew this was not just a moment of rescue. It was a reminder of her own strength. Outside, the air was still cold. But inside her, something warm stayed with her. And everyone who witnessed it knew they had seen something important. Something they would remember long after the bread cooled and the coffee cups were empty. The bakery slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt exactly the same. People moved again, ordered again, spoke again. Yet the air carried a softness that had not been there before. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something important happens, when everyone is aware they shared a moment that mattered. The girl stepped fully outside and stood just beyond the door for a second. She let the cold touch her face. Felt sharp but honest. She breathed in deeply and held it, then let it go. Her hands were still warm from the bag she held, and that warmth seemed to travel up her arms and settle in her chest. She did not rush away. She had learned not to hurry her feelings. She stood there and let the moment sink in. The words spoken inside the bakery echoed in her mind. Not loudly, but clearly. They felt steady, like something she could lean on. Inside, the teenagers gathered their things. Their movements were quicker now, less careless. They avoided looking around, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. One of them muttered something under his breath. Not angry, just uncomfortable. They paid and left without another word. A few customers watched them go, then turned their attention back to their own tables. Some shook their heads quietly. Others looked thoughtful, as if reconsidering moments in their own lives when they had chosen silence. The man sat with his coffee again, though it had gone cold. He didn't seem to mind. He watched the door for a moment, as if making sure the girl was all right. When he saw her standing outside, breathing calmly, he relaxed slightly. The staff exchanged glances and soft smiles. One of them whispered that it was good someone had spoken up. Another nodded, guilt and relief mixed together. They returned to their work with lighter hands. Outside, the girl finally started walking. Her steps were steady, unhurried. She moved down the sidewalk with her shoulders back, her head high. People passed her without noticing, unaware of the quiet victory she carried with her. She thought about how close she had been to leaving earlier, how easy it would have been to walk out carrying nothing but hurt. Instead, she was leaving with something stronger. Proof that calm could be powerful, that dignity could change a room. She remembered the gentle hug, the words spoken with respect. They replayed softly in her mind, not as a dramatic scene, but as a reminder. She smiled to herself, just a little. Inside the bakery, the man stood up at last. He finished his coffee in one slow sip and placed the cup neatly on the table. As he walked toward the counter to leave, a few people glanced at him with quiet admiration. Someone thanked him under their breath. He nodded in return, brushing it off as if it were nothing special. To him, it was simply the right thing to do. He stepped outside and paused when he saw the girl farther down the sidewalk. He did not call out to her. He did not follow. He trusted that she would carry her strength forward on her own. The door closed behind him, the bell ringing softly. The bakery returned fully to its routine, but a subtle shift remained. People spoke a little kinder, listened a little closer. The girl continued walking, the sounds of the street surrounding her now. Cars passed. A bus stopped nearby. Someone laughed on the other side of the road. Life moved on. She thought about the future, about the next time she might face something similar. She knew challenges would come again. They always did. But now she knew something else too, that she was not as alone as it sometimes felt. That courage could appear in unexpected forms. She reached a corner and stopped, waiting for the light to change. As she stood there, she caught her reflection in a shop window. She studied her face for a moment. She saw someone strong, not because someone else had stepped in, but because she had stayed, because she had held her ground quietly, because she had chosen dignity over reaction. The light changed. She crossed the street and disappeared into the flow of the city. Back at the bakery, conversations drifted. Someone mentioned how moments like that were teaching opportunities. Someone else admitted they wished they had spoken sooner. There was no blame, just reflection. The morning passed. Bread sold. Coffee cups emptied. Chairs scraped against the floor. Yet the memory lingered, light but present. For the girl, the day unfolded differently now. She carried herself with a new ease, not because the world had changed, but because she had. The words spoken to her stayed close, not as praise, but as recognition. They reminded her that being calm in the face of disrespect was not weakness. It was strength. And though she did not know it, the moment she lived through would stay with others too. A quiet example of how dignity, when met with courage, could reshape a space. The bakery would go on as it always had. But for those who were there that morning, something small and important had shifted. And for the girl, that shift marked the beginning of a deeper confidence. One that would guide her long after the smell of bread faded and the sound of the bell was forgotten. The rest of the day moved forward in small, ordinary moments, but for the girl, each one felt a little different. She went about her tasks with a calm focus, noticing details she might have ignored before. The sound of footsteps beside her, the warmth of sunlight on a wall, the rhythm of the city around her. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt slightly brighter. She stopped by a park later that afternoon and sat on a bench, placing the paper bag beside her. She took out the bread and broke off a small piece, eating slowly. The simple taste grounded her. It reminded her that life was made up of moments like this, quiet and real. As she sat there, her thoughts returned to the bakery. Not to the hurtful words, but to what came after. The calm voice, the respectful hug, the way the room shifted without shouting or chaos. She realized that strength did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came softly, changing things without force. People passed by the park without noticing her. Parents walked with children. Someone jogged past with headphones on. A dog pulled eagerly at its leash. Life continued, unaware of the small transformation taking place inside her. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be. Someone who stayed kind even when kindness was tested. Someone who did not let anger decide her actions. The moment in the bakery had shown her that this path, though harder, was possible. Across the city, the man went on with his day as well. He did not think of what he had done as something heroic. To him, it was simply standing up for respect. He had spent a lifetime learning when to speak and when to listen. That wisdom had guided him once more. He knew the girl would be all right. He trusted that. He had seen the strength in her posture, the steadiness in her eyes. She did not need saving. She only needed acknowledgement. As evening approached, the girl stood and brushed crumbs from her hands. She tied the bag carefully and placed it back in her backpack. She took one last look around the park, then headed home. When she reached her door, she paused. She thought about telling someone what had happened, not for sympathy, but to share the lesson. She smiled softly, knowing there would be time for that later. Inside, the familiar comfort of home wrapped around her. She set her things down and moved through the space with ease. The day had been long, but it had given her something valuable. She looked at herself in the mirror that evening. Really looked. She saw someone growing into herself. Someone learning that dignity could be both quiet and powerful. The memory of the bakery did not fade overnight. It stayed with her in small ways. In how she walked, in how she spoke, in how she met the eyes of others without fear. Days passed. The city kept moving. The bakery opened each morning, filled with new customers and new conversations. Most people there would never know about the moment that had unfolded before, but a few would remember, and that was enough. For the girl, the experience became part of her story. Not the insults, but the response. Not the silence, but the strength that followed it. She began to notice changes in herself. A steadier voice, calmer heart, a deeper understanding that her worth did not depend on the approval of strangers. One afternoon, she found herself standing up for someone else. Quietly, respectfully, without anger. She did not think much of it at the time, but later she realized where the courage had come from. The lesson had traveled forward. Some moments end when the scene closes. Others ripple outward, touching lives in ways unseen. The morning in the bakery was one of those moments. It reminded those who witnessed it that respect matters. That silence can be broken without shouting. That dignity, when protected, has the power to teach. For the girl, it became a turning point. Not because someone else stepped in, but because she stood firm long enough for respect to meet her where she was. She carried that knowledge with her into the future, into rooms where she would be questioned, into spaces where she might once have felt small. She would remember the calm. She would remember the strength. And she would remember that sometimes the most powerful moments happen in the most ordinary places. The story did not end with applause or celebration. It ended with understanding. And sometimes that is the most meaningful ending of all.